The morning sun rose over Earth just like any other day, but Captain Jake Morrison knew this would be the last normal sunrise humanity would see for a very long time. He stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the radar screens fill with red dots that shouldn't exist. The dots were moving fast toward Earth, too fast to be anything humans had built. Jake pressed the communication button and spoke into his headset. "Control, this is Defiance. We're seeing multiple unknown contacts approaching from deep space. Please confirm you're tracking these signals." The voice that came back sounded nervous. "Defiance, this is Admiral Lisa Grant at Earth Defense Command. We see them too. Count shows over 200 vessels, sizes ranging from our largest carriers to something we can't even measure. They'll reach Earth orbit in 6 hours. Jake felt his stomach drop. 200 ships was more than the entire human space fleet, combined. He looked around at his crew. Engineer Carlos Martinez was already running diagnostics on their weapons systems. Communications Officer Steve Parker was trying to pick up any signals from the approaching fleet. Everyone moved with the quick precision of people who knew their lives depended on getting things right. On the planet below, Dr. Amy Collins was in her laboratory when the emergency alert came through. She had been working on translation software for potential alien contact, though she never expected to use it so soon. The alert message was simple and terrifying. Unknown alien fleet approaching Earth. All military personnel report to stations immediately. Amy grabbed her research files and ran toward the emergency transport. As one of Earth's top experts in alien communication theory, she knew they would need her. During the ride to the Defense Command Center, she watched through the window as people in the streets stopped and stared at the sky. News broadcasts were already spreading the word. Some people ran toward their homes, others just stood still, not knowing what to do. At the command center, Admiral Lisa Grant was coordinating the response. She was a tough woman who had worked her way up through 20 years of military service, but nothing had prepared her for this. General Rick Hayes stood beside her, arguing for an immediate military response. "We should hit them while they're still in deep space," Rick said, pointing at the tactical display. "Every ship we have, full weapons, show them we won't go down without a fight." Lisa shook her head. "Rick, look at those numbers. They have us outnumbered 10-1, and we don't even know what their weapons can do. If we attack first, we give them an excuse to wipe us out completely. They're heading straight for us with a fleet that size," Rick replied. "I don't think they need an excuse." Dr. Collins arrived at the command center and was immediately brought to the communication station. The technicians had been trying to contact the alien fleet for 2 hours with no response. Amy looked at the signals they were sending and realized the problem immediately. "You're broadcasting on frequencies that work for human technology," she told them. "But look at the energy signatures from their ships. They're using completely different power systems. We need to try broader spectrum communication." She worked quickly to modify the communication array. Within minutes, they were broadcasting welcome messages in mathematical sequences, basic physics principles, and simple pictographs that any intelligent species should understand. For an hour, there was still no response. Then everything changed. The alien fleet suddenly stopped moving. All 200 ships held position at the edge of Earth's solar system. The largest vessel, something so massive it showed up on gravity sensors, moved to the front of the formation. A signal came through that made every radio and communication device on Earth activate at once. The voice that spoke was mechanical, clearly translated by some kind of computer system. But the words were in perfect English. "Humans of the planet Earth, You have been selected for incorporation into the Zethrak Empire. Your resistance is neither expected nor desired. You will prepare for the arrival of our administrative forces. Any military action against our fleet will result in the immediate destruction of your world. The message repeated in dozens of languages. Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and languages Amy didn't even recognize. Somehow, the aliens had learned every human language and were broadcasting to everyone on the planet at once. Admiral Grant tried to respond, broadcasting diplomatic messages, offering to discuss terms for peaceful contact. The aliens ignored every attempt at communication. Instead, they began moving again, but now their formation was different. The largest ships stayed back, while smaller vessels, each still larger than anything humans had built, moved toward Earth. Captain Morrison watched from the Defiance as the alien advance ships entered Earth's atmosphere. They moved like nothing he had ever seen, ignoring gravity and physics as if those rules didn't apply to them. The ships positioned themselves over major cities around the world: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Delhi, Tokyo. Within an hour, there was an alien ship hovering over every major population center on Earth. Dr. Collins was monitoring the alien communications when she noticed something strange. The ships weren't just broadcasting surrender demands. They were also sending signals to each other, and some of those signals were in frequencies that seemed designed to be overheard by human technology. "Admiral," she said, "I think they want us to intercept some of their communications. Look at this pattern." She showed the signal analysis to Admiral Grant. The aliens were discussing their plans in a way that seemed almost too easy to decode. They talked about how quickly human civilizations usually surrendered, how most species gave up after the first demonstration of superior technology. "It's like they're reading from a script," Amy said. "This is exactly how they've done this before." General Hayes was studying the tactical situation when the first attack began, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of targeting military bases or government buildings, the alien ships began firing on civilian areas: shopping centers, schools, hospitals, residential neighborhoods. The weapons they used created massive explosions that could be seen from space. But something was wrong with the damage patterns. Captain Morrison was flying reconnaissance missions around one of the alien ships when he noticed it. "Control! The damage from their weapons doesn't match the size of the explosions. It looks like they're using some kind of enhanced visual effects to make the destruction appear worse than it actually is." Amy was thinking the same thing as she analyzed the attack patterns. The aliens were creating terror, but they weren't actually trying to kill as many people as possible. It was like they wanted to scare humanity into surrendering rather than fight a real war. But the attacks were still deadly. Thousands of people were dying, and the government was under enormous pressure to surrender before the aliens decided to use their full power. President Martinez was preparing to broadcast a surrender message when Admiral Grant made a desperate decision. "We're evacuating key personnel," she announced. "If Earth falls, we need to make sure some humans survive to rebuild somewhere else." The evacuation was chaotic. 17 ships, everything from military vessels to cargo haulers, were quickly loaded with essential personnel, scientific data, and supplies. Captain Morrison took command of the escape fleet aboard the Defiance. Other ships included the cargo vessel New Hope under Captain Pete Williams and the research ship Discovery with Dr. Collins and her team. As the 17 ships prepared to leave Earth, the alien attacks intensified. The explosions grew larger and more frequent. Communication with the surface became impossible as the aliens jammed all frequencies. From space, it looked like Earth was being systematically destroyed. Captain. Morrison gave the order to jump to faster-than-light speed just as the largest alien ship moved into position over North America. The last thing the human survivors saw was a series of explosions so bright they lit up half the planet. As far as they knew, they were watching their homeworld die. The 17 ships raced away from Earth, carrying what they believed were the last free humans in the universe. Behind them, the planet that had given birth to their species appeared to be nothing more than a burning ruin. They had escaped, but at the cost of everything they had ever known. Or so they thought. The 17 human ships drifted through the darkness of space, their crews struggling to process what they had witnessed. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the Defiance, staring at the long-range sensors that showed nothing but empty space where Earth should have been sending signals. Every few hours, someone would try to contact their homeworld, but there was only silence. Dr. Amy Collins sat in her laboratory aboard the Discovery, surrounded by the data she had managed to download during the evacuation. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, but her mind kept drifting back to the image of Earth burning. She had left behind her sister and her parents, along with 8 billion other people who had trusted their governments to protect them. Captain Pete Williams walked through the cargo holds of the New Hope, checking on the civilians they had managed to evacuate. Families huddled together in spaces meant for equipment storage. Children asked when they could go home, and the adults had no answers to give them. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Janet Ross, was treating people for shock and anxiety, but there wasn't much she could do for the deeper wounds. Commander Lucy Torres had the hardest job of all. As the senior officer responsible for civilian morale, she had to find ways to keep people from giving up completely. Every day brought new reports of depression, panic attacks, and people who just stopped eating. Some of the survivors talked about finding a nice planet somewhere and just waiting to die. Others wanted to mount a suicide attack against the aliens, even though their small fleet couldn't possibly win. The escape had been so rushed that the ships weren't properly supplied. For a long journey, food would last maybe 6 months if they were careful. Water recycling systems were working, but they weren't designed for this many people. The New Hope was carrying 3 times its normal capacity, and the other ships weren't much better. Steve Parker spent his days monitoring alien communications, hoping to learn something that might help them survive. What he found instead made everything worse. The aliens, who called themselves the Zethrak Empire, were already discussing their next targets. They talked about Earth like it was just another successful conquest, another primitive world that had fallen to their superior technology. 3 weeks after the escape, Captain Morrison called a meeting of all ship commanders. They gathered in the Defiance's conference room, their faces showing the strain of constant worry and sleepless nights. The question everyone was avoiding finally had to be asked. What were they going to do now? "We can't keep running forever," Captain Williams said. "Our supplies won't last and the people are losing hope. Some of them are talking about surrender, going back and begging the aliens for mercy." "There's nothing to go back to, Commander," Torres replied. "Earth is gone. We all saw it burn." Dr. Collins had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now she spoke up. "I've been analyzing the data from the attack, and something doesn't make sense. The energy readings from those explosions were enormous, visible from space, but the actual destruction patterns were inconsistent." She activated a holographic display showing her analysis. "Look at this. The aliens used weapons that created massive light shows, but the actual physical damage was much less than it appeared. It's like they were more interested in creating A spectacle than in efficiently destroying targets. Jake studied the data. What are you saying, Amy? That they were holding back? I'm saying that maybe the attack was designed to look worse than it actually was. Think about it. If you wanted to conquer a planet, would you completely destroy all the infrastructure and kill all the workers? Or would you want to keep those resources intact? The room went quiet as everyone considered the implications. If Dr. Collins was right, then Earth might not be completely destroyed. But that raised even more disturbing questions about what the aliens might be doing to the survivors. Meanwhile, in the command ship of the Zethrak fleet, Commander Vextar was filing his report with the High Command. The conquest of Earth had proceeded exactly according to standard protocol. The primitive humans had reacted predictably to the demonstration of superior force. A few ships had escaped, which was also part of the plan. Those survivors would spread word throughout the galaxy about Zethrak power, discouraging other species from resisting. Vextar had commanded 17 successful conquests using the same basic strategy. Arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate technological superiority, then use psychological warfare to break the enemy's will to fight. Most species surrendered within days. The few that didn't were quickly crushed by the full power of the Zethrak war fleet. Earth had been slightly different because humans were more emotionally attached to their homeworld than most species. The psychological profile prepared by Zethrak, intelligence had recommended using spectacular destruction displays to convince any survivors that their planet was completely lost. The holographic enhancement systems had worked perfectly, creating the illusion of planetary devastation while leaving most of the infrastructure intact. Now Earth was being prepared for resource extraction. The surviving human population would be relocated to work camps where they would mine metals and manufacture goods for the Empire. It was a system that had worked on dozens of worlds. Keep the workers alive but hopeless, and they would cause no trouble. Back on the human ships, the daily routine of survival continued. Engineers worked around the clock to keep the life support systems running. The medical staff treated injuries and illnesses with limited supplies. Everyone tried to stay busy enough that they didn't have time to think about what they had lost. But Dr. Collins couldn't stop thinking. She spent hours reviewing every piece of data from the alien attack, looking for patterns and clues. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit together. She started monitoring Zethrak communications more carefully, using the language translation programs she had developed. Most of their signals were encrypted, but occasionally she picked up routine transmissions that revealed details about their operations. That's when she made the discovery that changed everything. The transmission was brief, just a status report from one of the Zethrak administrative ships, but it mentioned resource extraction schedules and worker housing assignments for something called Sector 7 Terra. Dr. Collins ran the designation through her databases and felt her heart start racing. Terra was the old Latin name for Earth. Sector 7. Terra wasn't a destroyed planet. It was an active Zethrak resource extraction site. Amy stared at the translation for several minutes, afraid to believe what she was reading. If this was real, then Earth hadn't been destroyed at all. The planet was still there, and so were its people. But instead of being free, they were slaves in Zethrak mining operations. She ran the translation program 3 more times to make sure she hadn't made an error. Each time, the result was the same. Earth was listed as an active resource site with an estimated population of 7.2 billion human workers. Dr. Collins sat back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities. If Earth still existed, then everything changed. The 17 ships weren't the last survivors of humanity. They were the only free humans left in the galaxy. The question was, what could 17 small ships do against an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds? Amy looked around her laboratory at the research data she had saved during the evacuation. Weapons technology, space drive systems, manufacturing techniques, and most importantly, theoretical research into areas that human ethics had prevented them from exploring. For the first time since the escape, Dr. Collins felt something other than despair. She felt anger. The Zethrak had made one crucial mistake in their conquest of Earth. They had let the human scientists escape, and they had underestimated what desperate people could accomplish when they had nothing left to lose. She began organizing her data, files, looking for anything that could be turned into a weapon or a tactical advantage. The Zethrak thought they were dealing with broken survivors fleeing their destroyed homeworld. They had no idea they had just created their own worst nightmare. Free humans with advanced technology and absolutely nothing left to lose. Dr. Amy Collins stared at the intercepted transmission for the 100th time, her hands shaking as she read the words that changed everything. The Zethrak communication was routine, almost boring, but it contained information that made her heart race. Earth was designated as Resource Site 7 Terra, with 7.2 billion human workers assigned to mining and manufacturing operations. She had spent 3 months believing her world was destroyed, mourning everyone she had ever known, and now she learned they were alive but enslaved. Amy felt anger building inside her like nothing she had ever experienced. The Zethrak had not just conquered Earth, they had made the survivors believe it was gone forever. Amy knew she had to tell the others, but she needed more proof first. One transmission could be an error or mistranslation. She began monitoring Zethrak communications more carefully, focusing on administrative channels that might reveal more information about their conquered worlds. Over the next 2 weeks, she gathered enough evidence to remove all doubt. Earth was not only intact, but it was one of the most productive resource sites in the Zethrak Empire. The reports mentioned human workers who were efficient and adaptable, though they required more psychological control than other conquered species due to their emotional attachments. The Zethrak files revealed their entire conquest strategy. They didn't destroy worlds because destruction was wasteful. Instead, they used psychological warfare to break the will of the population, then put survivors to work in massive industrial operations. The fake destruction displays served 2 purposes. They convinced any escaped survivors that return was impossible, and they spread fear among other worlds about Zethrak power. When Amy finally had enough evidence, she called Captain Jake Morrison and requested an emergency meeting. Jake arrived at her laboratory with Commander Lucy Torres and Communications Officer Steve Parker. Amy had decided to tell them first before revealing the truth to everyone else. "I need you to sit down for this," Amy said, her voice shaking. "What I'm about to show you changes everything we thought we knew about what happened to Earth." She activated her computer display and showed them the intercepted transmissions. Jake read the first few lines and went completely still. Steve started cursing in 3 different languages. Lucy just stared at the screen without saying anything. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Jake asked finally. "I've verified the translations dozens of times," Amy replied. "I've cross-referenced the data with everything we know about Zethrak communication protocols. Earth is alive, Jake. Our families are alive, but they're slaves." The silence in the room lasted for several minutes as everyone processed the implications. Finally, Steve spoke up. "If this is real, then we need to tell everyone immediately. People have a right to know their loved ones are still alive. Wait, Lucy said. Think about what happens when we reveal this information. Half the people will want to mount a rescue mission immediately, even though it would be suicide. The other half will fall apart completely when they realize what their families are going through. Jake was thinking through the tactical implications. If Earth is still there, and if the Zethrak think we believe it's destroyed, then we have an advantage they don't know about. We're not refugees anymore. We're the only free human military force in the galaxy. Amy nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking. The Zethrak strategy depends on breaking the spirit of conquered populations. But we're not conquered. We're angry, and we have something they don't expect us to have. Which is what? Steve asked. Hope, Amy replied, and detailed knowledge of their operational procedures. I've been analyzing their communications for months. I know how their command structure works, how they coordinate between different conquered worlds, even how they schedule supply shipments. Over the next few hours, they developed a plan for revealing the truth to the rest of the survivors. They would start with the ship commanders and senior officers, then gradually inform everyone else. The goal was to channel the anger and desperation into something productive, rather than letting it destroy morale completely. Captain Pete Williams was the first person they told outside of the original group. His reaction was typical of what they expected from everyone else. First shock, then disbelief, then rage so intense he started planning immediate rescue operations that would have gotten everyone killed. We have to go back, Pete said, pacing around the conference room. We can't leave them there to suffer while we run around playing refugee. Pete, listen to me, Jake replied. 17 ships against the entire Zethrak Empire is not a rescue mission. It's a suicide mission. If we're going to help Earth, we need to be smart about it. Dr. Janet Ross was brought in to help manage the psychological impact of the revelation. She recommended revealing the truth gradually, starting with people who were emotionally stable enough to handle it. Some of the civilians were still barely holding together after 3 months of believing their world was destroyed. As word spread through the small fleet, the change in atmosphere was dramatic. The hopelessness that had dominated everything since the escape began to transform into something else. People who had been preparing to die were now planning to fight. The grief was still there, but it was mixed with determination. Amy continued her analysis of Zethrak operations, but now she had help. Steve Parker used his communications expertise to intercept more transmissions. Carlos Martinez, the engineer from the Defiance, began studying Zethrak technology to look for weaknesses. Even some of the civilians contributed their specialized knowledge. Dr. Helen Price, a physicist who had been evacuated from the Lunar Research Station, made the first breakthrough in understanding Zethrak weapons technology. She discovered that their energy weapons were powerful but used a lot of power, which meant their ships had to recharge between major attacks. It explains why they use psychological warfare instead of just destroying everything, Helen explained. Their weapons are impressive, but they can't sustain a long fight against multiple targets. They need enemies to surrender quickly, or they start having power management problems. This information changed how everyone thought about their situation. The Zethrak weren't invincible after all. They were powerful, but they had limitations that could be exploited by an enemy who understood their technology. Amy began developing plans that took advantage of this knowledge. If the human ships could force the Zethrak into extended battles, they might be able to level the playing field. But that would require weapons and tactics that humans had never used before. She opened her files on theoretical weapons research, projects that had been abandoned on Earth because they were considered too dangerous or unethical. With their world enslaved and billions of people depending on them, those ethical concerns no longer applied. The humans had something else the Zethrak didn't expect. They were completely unpredictable. The aliens had conquered dozens of worlds, using the same basic strategy because most intelligent species reacted logically to overwhelming force. They either surrendered or fought conventional battles they couldn't win. But humans weren't always logical. They were emotional, stubborn, and willing to try things that more advanced species would consider insane. Amy realized that this apparent weakness might actually be their greatest advantage. She began planning operations that no rational species would attempt. Attacks that ignored conventional military wisdom. Strategies that depended on doing exactly what the enemy thought was impossible. Jake listened to her ideas and realized that Amy was right. The Zethrak had never faced an enemy like humanity before. They had no experience dealing with people who would sacrifice everything for emotional reasons, who would attempt impossible missions because giving up wasn't acceptable. "We're not going to beat them with superior technology," Jake said. "We're going to beat them by being more human than they expect anyone to be." The 17 ships were no longer fleeing refugees. They had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a human military force with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The Zethrak Empire was about to learn why underestimating humanity was the worst mistake they could possibly make. 6 months after learning the truth about Earth, the 17 human ships had transformed from a refugee fleet into something the galaxy had never seen before. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the modified command center of the Defiance, surrounded by tactical displays showing Zethrak operations across dozens of star systems. They were no longer running away from the aliens. They were hunting them. The plan had started small. Dr. Amy Collins suggested that they pose as desperate refugees seeking a new home while secretly gathering intelligence about Zethrak operations. The aliens were so confident in their psychological warfare that they barely paid attention to the survivors of their conquered worlds. Captain Sarah Murphy had volunteered to lead the first reconnaissance mission. Her ship, the science vessel Explorer, approached a Zethrak supply depot while broadcasting distress signals and requests for humanitarian aid. The aliens ignored them completely, which gave Sarah's team 12 hours to scan their operations and record everything. What they found changed everything. They thought they knew about the Zethrak Empire. The supply depot was managing resources from 7 different conquered worlds, but something was wrong with the records. According to Zethrak databases, 5 of those worlds had been completely destroyed during conquest operations. Yet, the depot was receiving regular shipments of manufactured goods and raw materials from those same planets. "They're not destroying any of the worlds," Sarah reported back to the fleet. "Every single planet they've destroyed is actually a resource extraction site, with the original population working as slaves." Dr. Collins ran the numbers and felt sick. If the pattern held across the entire Zethrak Empire, then millions of intelligent beings were living as slaves while the galaxy believed their species were extinct. The psychological warfare wasn't just designed to break individual worlds. It was meant to prevent anyone from organizing a resistance movement. Jake realized they had stumbled onto something bigger than just rescuing Earth. "We're not just fighting to save humanity," he told the assembled ship commanders. "We're fighting to save everyone the Zethrak have ever conquered." The revelation changed their entire strategy. Instead of planning a desperate attack on Earth, they began building an intelligence network that could gather information about Zethrak operations throughout the galaxy. The key was that the aliens still thought they were dealing with broken refugees who posed no threat. Lieutenant Tony Garcia proved to be a natural at covert operations. His background in military engineering made him perfect for infiltrating Zethrak facilities and stealing technology. His first major success came when he led a team onto a supply station while pretending to beg for food and medical supplies. The Zethrak guards barely looked at them, which allowed Tony to plant monitoring devices throughout the station's computer network. Within days, the humans were intercepting detailed information about supply routes, personnel transfers, and security protocols across an entire sector of the Empire. "The Zethrak think they're invincible," Tony explained after his third successful infiltration. "They've never had to deal with a real resistance movement, so their security is focused on preventing slave uprisings, not stopping military intelligence operations." Steve Parker had become the fleet's expert on Zethrak communications, and he made the next breakthrough. While monitoring routine transmissions, he discovered references to other refugee fleets from conquered worlds. The aliens maintained files on survival groups from dozens of different species, tracking their movements to make sure they didn't become a threat. "Jake, there are others out there," Steve said, showing him the intercepted data. "The Corixians have at least 30 ships that escaped when their world was destroyed 2 years ago. The Vorthak have a dozen ships hiding in the Outer Rim. There are survivors from almost every world the Zethrak have conquered." Amy realized the implications immediately. "If we can contact those other refugee groups and tell them the truth about their home worlds, we could build a real resistance movement. The Zethrak strategy depends on keeping everyone isolated and hopeless." The first contact was with a group of Corixian survivors who had been drifting through space for 3 years. Captain Morrison approached them carefully, using the diplomatic protocols Amy had developed for dealing with alien species. The Corixians were suspicious at first, but when the humans showed them proof that their homeworld still existed, everything changed. Commander Zek Thul of the Corixian fleet wept when he saw the evidence that his people were still alive. Corixians expressed emotion through color changes in their skin, and Zek Thul's reaction was visible even to humans. "We believed our race was extinct," he said through the translation system. "Our children have grown up thinking they were the last Corixians in the universe." The alliance between humans and Corixians led to rapid expansion of the resistance network. The Corixians had been conducting their own intelligence operations, though they hadn't understood the scope of Zethrak deception. Together, the two species began contacting other survivor groups and sharing information about Zethrak operations. Each new contact brought more resources and capabilities to the resistance. The Vorthak were natural infiltrators whose shape-changing abilities made them perfect spies. The Nexari had maintained some of their industrial technology and could manufacture equipment the resistance needed. The Gorlaxians were warriors whose military traditions had survived even the destruction of their homeworld. Within a year, the resistance network included survivors from 15 different conquered worlds. They shared intelligence, resources, and most importantly, hope. For the first time since the Zethrak Empire had begun its expansion, the aliens faced organized opposition from multiple species working together. Dr. Collins had been developing new technologies based on captured Zethrak equipment and theoretical research from Earth. Her first major breakthrough was a communication system that could penetrate Zethrak jamming technology. This allowed resistance cells to coordinate operations across vast distances without being detected. Her second breakthrough was even more important. She figured out how to modify human weapons to be effective against Zethrak shields. The key was understanding that Zethrak technology was designed to defend against energy weapons used by most advanced species. But humans had a long history of using kinetic weapons that the aliens hadn't encountered before. Their shields can stop plasma beams and particle weapons, Amy explained to the assembled resistance leaders. But they're not designed to handle old-fashioned projectiles moving at high velocity. We can modify our missiles and torpedoes to punch right through their defenses. The resistance began planning its first major operation, a coordinated strike against multiple Zethrak facilities designed to disrupt their supply lines and communication networks. The goal wasn't to defeat the Empire in open battle, but to prove that the conquered worlds could fight back. Captain Williams led the attack on a Zethrak mining operation in the Outer Rim. His team used information gathered by Tony Garcia to infiltrate the facility and plant explosives in critical locations. When the charges detonated, they destroyed 6 months' worth of processed materials and shut down mining operations for an entire sector. Meanwhile, Sarah Murphy's team attacked a communication relay station using Amy's new weapons technology to punch through Zethrak shields and destroy the facility completely. For the first time in decades, an entire region of the Empire lost contact with Central Command. The most important part of the operation was the message the Resistance broadcast on every frequency the Zethrak used. Amy had prepared a transmission that revealed the truth about the Empire's conquest strategy, providing evidence that dozens of supposedly destroyed worlds were actually still inhabited. "People of the conquered worlds," the message began, "your families are alive, your planets still exist. The Zethrak Empire has lied to you about the destruction of your homeworlds to prevent you from organizing resistance movements. We are the survivors of those worlds, and we are fighting to free everyone the Empire has enslaved." The broadcast included detailed evidence about multiple worlds, showing resource extraction schedules, population counts, and facility locations. It was impossible for the Zethrak to dismiss as propaganda because the information was too accurate and detailed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Resistance cells that had been operating in isolation suddenly realized they were part of a galaxy-wide network of survivors. Groups that had spent years believing their species were extinct learned that billions of their people were still alive. Commander Vex Tar received the emergency reports in his command ship and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. The conquest of Earth was supposed to have been routine, just another primitive world falling to superior Zethrak technology. Instead, it had somehow triggered the formation of the largest resistance movement in the Empire's history. The humans had done something that no conquered species had ever managed. They had turned the Empire's greatest strength, its psychological warfare strategy, into a weakness. By revealing the truth about the fake destructions, they had given hope to millions of beings who had been living in despair. 2 years after the escape from Earth, the 17 human ships had become the command center of the largest rebellion in galactic history. Captain Jake Morrison stood before a holographic display showing resistance operations across 43 star systems, each one representing a world the Zethrak Empire had claimed to destroy but actually enslaved. The resistance now included survivors from 28 different species, over 300 ships, and intelligence networks on every major Zethrak facility in the galaxy. What had started as a desperate flight from a conquered homeworld had grown into a coordinated military force that threatened the foundation of the Empire itself. Dr. Amy Collins had spent months preparing for this moment. Her laboratory aboard the Discovery was filled with weapons technology that combined human innovation with captured Zethrak equipment and knowledge shared by other resistance species. The theoretical research that Earth's scientists had abandoned for ethical reasons had been transformed into practical weapons that could challenge alien superiority. "The plan is ambitious," Amy explained to the assembled resistance leaders. "We're going to attack every major Zethrak facility simultaneously while broadcasting the truth about their empire to every conquered world. The goal isn't just military victory. We're going to destroy their ability to maintain psychological control over the enslaved populations." Commander Zek Thul of the Carixian fleet studied the tactical display. His skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated intense concentration. "The coordination required for this operation is beyond anything that has ever been attempted. If even one part of the plan fails, the Zethrak will have time to organize a response." "That's why we're not giving them time," Jake replied. "Lieutenant Garcia has spent 6 months infiltrating their communication network. When the operation begins, every Zethrak facility will lose contact with Central Command simultaneously." Tony Garcia had become the Resistance's master of covert operations. His latest infiltration had been the most dangerous yet, planting monitoring and control devices in the central Zethrak communication hub. It had taken him 3 weeks of pretending to be a refugee seeking aid to get close enough to their primary servers. "I've got control of their entire network," Tony reported. "When you give the word, I can shut down communications across the Empire and broadcast our message on every frequency they use. They won't be able to coordinate a response or stop the transmission." The Resistance had divided into specialized task forces, each with a specific mission in the coordinated attack. Captain Sarah Murphy led the Intelligence Division, using modified ships to penetrate Zethrak space and gather real-time information about enemy movements. Captain Pete Williams commanded the Heavy Assault Force, using weapons Amy had developed to punch through alien shields and armor. Steve Parker had become the Resistance's communication specialist, coordinating between dozens of different species and ensuring that orders could be transmitted across vast distances without being intercepted. His work was especially important because the operation required precise timing across multiple star systems. The most critical part of the plan was the message that would be broadcast to every conquered world. Amy had worked with representatives from all the enslaved species to create a transmission that would reach their people in their native languages and cultural contexts. "People of the galaxy," the message began, "you have been told that your homeworlds were destroyed and your species nearly extinct. This is a lie. Your families, your cultures, your civilizations still exist. The Zethrak Empire has enslaved your worlds and broken your spirits with deception. But the survivors remember, and we are coming home." The broadcast included detailed evidence about conditions on each enslaved world, proof that the destruction displays had been elaborate hoaxes, and most importantly, instructions for organized resistance when the liberation forces arrived. Dr. Helen Price had solved the technical challenges of the operation by developing new, faster-than-light communication technology. Her system could coordinate attacks across multiple star systems with precision timing that would prevent the Zethrak from mounting an effective response. "We'll have a 6-hour window," Helen explained. "That's how long it will take the Zethrak to establish backup communications and coordinate their scattered forces. If we can't accomplish our objectives in 6 hours, we'll be facing the full power of their empire." The operation began at exactly 800 Galactic Standard Time, with Tony Garcia activating the communication disruption system. Across the Empire, Zethrak facilities suddenly found themselves unable to contact their command structure or coordinate with other installations. The silence was deafening for an organization that depended on rigid hierarchical control. Simultaneously, resistance forces began their attacks. Captain Williams led the assault on the primary Zethrak stronghold in the core worlds, using weapons that the aliens had never encountered before. Amy's modifications to human kinetic weapons proved devastating against Zethrak shields, which had been designed to stop energy-based attacks. Sarah Murphy's reconnaissance teams guided newly awakened resistance movements on enslaved worlds, providing tactical information and coordination for uprisings that erupted across dozens of planets. The enslaved populations had been waiting for hope, and when it finally came, their response was overwhelming. The broadcast began 30 minutes into the operation, transmitted on every frequency the Zethrak used and several they didn't know about. On world after world, enslaved beings heard the truth about their situation for the first time in years or decades. The psychological control that had kept billions of people submissive shattered in a matter of hours. Commander Vextar watched his empire crumble from the bridge of his flagship. Every report brought worse news. Facilities under attack, slave uprisings on a dozen worlds, communication systems failing across entire sectors. The humans had done something he hadn't thought possible. They had turned the conquered populations into active enemies. "How did they coordinate this?" his tactical officer asked. "We had monitoring systems watching every refugee group in the galaxy." Vextar studied the tactical display and realized the scope of his failure. They weren't trying to hide from us. They were pretending to be what we expected them to be. Broken survivors seeking aid. We ignored them because we thought they were helpless. The most shocking revelation came when Vextar received reports from Earth itself, the planet that was supposed to be the Empire's most productive resource site was in complete revolt. The human workers had somehow maintained secret communication networks and resistance cells throughout their enslavement. When the liberation signal came, they were ready. Jake Morrison led the final assault personally, commanding a fleet of resistance, ships that had been modified with technology from a dozen different species. The 17 ships that had escaped Earth 2 years earlier were now the core of a force that included vessels from across the galaxy. The battle for Earth's liberation lasted 18 hours. The Zethrak defenders fought desperately, but they were facing an enemy they had never encountered before. People fighting to save their own homeworld with weapons designed by minds they had dismissed as primitive. Amy's technological innovations proved decisive. The humans had learned to combine their natural unpredictability with advanced alien science, creating weapons and tactics that no rational species would have developed. Missiles that changed course randomly to avoid point defense systems. Boarding parties that attacked through routes the defenders thought were impossible. Communications that used emotional resonance instead of logical protocols. The climax came when Jake's forces reached the Zethrak command ship in Earth orbit. Commander Vextar had prepared for conventional battle, but humans didn't fight conventionally. Tony Garcia led a boarding party that attacked through the ship's waste disposal system, a route no previous enemy had ever considered using. The fight aboard the command ship was brutal and personal. These weren't soldiers following orders. They were people who had spent 2 years believing their families were dead, only to learn they had been enslaved. The anger and determination they brought to the battle was something the Zethrak had never faced before. When Vextar finally surrendered, he found himself facing Captain Morrison in the ship's command center. Jake looked around at the alien technology that had seemed so impressive when it was used to threaten Earth. and realized how far humanity had come. "Your empire is built on a lie," Jake told the defeated commander. "You made people believe that resistance was hopeless by convincing them their worlds were destroyed. But you made one mistake. You let the survivors live, and you underestimated what desperate people can accomplish when they have nothing left to lose." The liberation of Earth was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, enslaved worlds were rising up against their captors with support from the Resistance Network. The Zethrak Empire, which had seemed invincible just days before, was collapsing as its psychological control systems failed. The 17 ships that had fled Earth as refugees returned to their homeworld as liberators. They found a planet scarred by mining operations but still alive, still inhabited by billions of humans who had never stopped hoping for freedom.